airstrike တွေကြုံရတဲ့ကလေးတွေရဲ့
I broke down while shooting photos for an article about kids dying in an airstrike.
Both of us are journalists, and it's made us irritable and impatient within the family.
Journalists, both in the country and abroad, need physical and psychological support.
Good mental health is a basic human right. But a recent UN report highlighted the huge impact that the violence and chaos unleashed by Myanmar's coup have had on people's mental health. It's the job of journalists to record and document these events. But this constant exposure is also affecting their mental health. Hello and welcome to Doh Athan, a weekly podcast about human rights stories from Myanmar. It's brought to you by Fondation Hirondelle. This episode is produced by a Doh Athan journalist. Names and voices may have been changed to protect contributors.
airstrike တွေကြုံရတဲ့ကလေးတွေရဲ့
I broke down while shooting photos for an article about kids dying in an airstrike. It affected me mentally so badly that I can't even take photos anymore. Just when I start to heal from one thing, something else happens, and I feel like I'm going insane. Sometimes I get so upset that I start having all these thoughts, even suicidal ones. That's why I've been seeing a mental health professional.
Doh Min is a journalist reporting from Kayah State, which has been heavily affected by conflict following Myanmar's military coup. He used to work in Yangon and has 16 years of experience as a journalist. But reporting on events since the coup has affected his mental health badly. Doh Min often documents the aftermath of conflicts between the Myanmar military and local resistance forces in Kayah. More and more photos of dead bodies fill his camera. Tiny Kayah State has suffered 1/5 of all the air attacks launched by the Myanmar military around the country, according to ISP Myanmar. And the damage done by air and artillery strikes is gruesome to witness.
The bodies of people killed by heavy weapons are different. And it's not something temporary either. It hit me hard when I kept having to take pictures of them. I know it's my job as a journalist, but I reached a point where I just couldn't handle the stress anymore.
The stress from his work has taken a toll on Doh Min's daily life. He's always anxious, his heart races, he jumps at the sound of a car door slamming. And the stress rises after each attack. For example, he documented the September 5th airstrike on the Bangkok IDP camp in Pekon, when more than 9 people, most of them children, were killed.
There was this guy in the Bangkok IDP camp who lost his 2-year-old son and his wife in an airstrike. Her head and face were gone. I interviewed him and thought about writing his story the day his whole world fell apart. But I still can't bring myself to do it. Every time I listen to the sound bites, I break down. I'm not ready to write that piece yet.
Since the coup, most of Myanmar's daily news has been dominated by reports of conflict or civilian deaths, arrests, torture, burned homes, and displaced populations. Those affected have suffered hugely and are likely to experience post-traumatic stress disorder or PTSD. But as psychiatrist Dr. Lin Lu explains, journalists can also experience secondary trauma through their reporting.
It's like vicarious trauma. When you're exposed to what others are going through, it makes you feel sad or overwhelmed. If you don't handle that well, stress is the first sign.
Mental health problems are found across society, of course. In a 2023 Cambridge University survey, almost 2/3 of over 7,700 adults in Myanmar showed symptoms of anxiety and depression. And while some people can avoid looking at distressing news, journalists like Go Min cannot. Reporting on these events is their job, and there's no way to avoid it. Studies suggest the trauma is also cumulative. A 2019 study from Ball State University in the US showed that as the frequency and intensity of coverage of violent news increases, so does the severity of PTSD symptoms. Ma Khine Yee has been a journalist for 18 years. Originally from Rakhine State, she's now living on the Thai-Myanmar border with her journalist husband and 2 children. She's also experiencing psychological distress from her reporting since the coup.
I just can't handle seeing children die anymore, whether it's because of airstrikes or something else. I only feel some relief after crying my eyes out, but it keeps happening. I have nightmares, dreams about fighting, and I'm running away, and I'm holding my child in my arms.
Nightmares are common symptoms of this kind of PTSD, as are sleeplessness, depression, difficulty concentrating, and anger or irritability. Ma Khine Yee admits that her and her husband's stress is impacting their family life.
Both of us are journalists, and it's made us irritable and impatient within the family. We don't want to talk, or we get upset over small things. We have to remind ourselves that this is because of our work and that our job is affecting us. But still, we get impatient and lash out. That's what covering these kinds of stories does to our mental health and our family life.
Journalists are not only suffering secondary trauma, they've also been the victims of traumatic events. Since the military coup, 7 journalists have been killed and over 200 arrested, according to the Detained Journalists Information Group. Journalist Ma Thuzar was arrested in September 2021 and charged under Section 505A, which criminalises so-called fake news or incitement. She was beaten during interrogation for a month, and she spent 16 months in insane prison before being released.
When the coup happened, I was terrified about how I could cover the news, and then I got arrested and sent to an interrogation centre. I was living in fear, trying to survive. It's so exhausting.
Ma Thuzar found her stress levels increasing even before the coup. After her release, she fled to Thailand, but she still can't escape from the trauma induced first by covering horrific events and then by her time in prison.
It started with COVID. We hadn't even gotten over that, and then the coup happened. That was when my mental health really started to decline. It got worse after I was arrested and separated from my family. When I finally got to Mae Sot, I was still struggling with things. I have been holding all this in for so long, and I don't know how much more I can take. I've been depressed, and I don't feel joy or emotional security anymore.
In this kind of situation, journalists need support. Ma Thuzar, founder of Myanmar Women in Media, said media organisations should recognise the problem and be considerate.
Journalists, both in the country and abroad, need physical and psychological support. They should be talking to experts. Media agencies and editors also need to look out for the journalists and consider whether they are overworked and make arrangements for them.
Mental health is more than just the absence of illness. According to the World Health Organization, WHO, it's about well-being that allows people to handle daily stresses, realize their abilities, and live in harmony with the environment. Historically, there's been little investment in mental health in Myanmar. UN figures from before the coup suggest there was barely one mental health worker for every 100,000 people. There's also been huge stigma associated with mental illness. But since the coup, more counselling services have sprung up, some of them free. Go Min is getting online counselling for his mental health. But healing takes time.
I used to see my counselor every 3 weeks, but now I'm back to weekly sessions. It helps, but the trauma is still there. Even when I feel okay for a moment, something new happens.
Naturally, psychiatrist Dr. Lin Lu recommends that people see a mental health professional. He also says hobbies, exercise, and talking to friends can be helpful. But he says there's no magic solution for journalists.
These emotions and stories, you can't avoid them. You have to understand and accept that this is part of the job. You're going to keep hearing and seeing these terrible things, and maybe even worse. But this is what you've chosen to do. You won't be able to solve all the problems people are facing. Your job is to show the world what's happening. You have to focus on that.
And Ma Thuzar believes it's crucial that journalists take care of themselves so that they can keep doing their jobs.
Independent media have to keep reporting the news. Journalists are the eyes and ears of the public. It's not just for the people, but for giving the world accurate information. We need to make sure we can continue doing this work, and that means taking care of both our mental and physical health.
Thanks for listening to this edition of Doh Athan. We'd welcome your feedback on social media, and please follow or subscribe to our pages. This project on human rights reporting is supported by Fondation Hirondelle with the help of our donors. You can listen to our podcasts via the Doh Athan Facebook page. They can also be found on SoundCloud, YouTube, iTunes, Spotify and Telegram. You can also listen every Saturday night from 9 to 10 p.m. and Sunday morning from 6 to 7 a.m. on Voice of America Radio. Please tune in again next week.